Welcome to Regulate This,
a really unfiltered podcast.
Hello, everyone out there, all of our listening peeps. We are here to share more compliance fun with you on Regulate This with Tracie Behr and my lovely co-host, Leila Shaver.
What's up? So I'm super excited about today's episode, Tracie. We're talking about the Compliance Tech Toolbox, right? So talking about the tech tools that streamline compliance and boost efficiency.
Make it as easy as possible. Keep it simple, silly is out there not only to remind people to do what is right and easy and helps them get shit done, but it's also out there to make sure people understand that there's no shame in your game. To get something standardized and to utilize it and to keep it as simple as possible means that other people are likely able to use it as well. So I think as we're talking about technology, being able to find ways to be more effective and efficient without making it overly complicated is just a way that you don't have to be chained to the desk, that it doesn't require you. The more complicated you make something, the more steps you add to something, the more you make it hoops to jump through that are unnecessary, the more it requires you. So unless you want a full-time job where you are the answer person, where you are the person that has to help everybody, unless you want that, let's talk about ways to streamline. Let's talk about ways to become more efficient. What are some of those things that people can do right out of the gate that will add value to their day without requiring a lot of them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of tools out there, and I say this as a good thing and an opportunity. I also say this to also alert those of us, because I am someone who also has this issue with shiny object syndrome. So there are a lot of tools out there. There are a lot of tools that are cool. They look really sleek. You think, ooh, I could use this down the road. I think one of the things I advise firms on is look at what you absolutely need, right? So from a high level, you need a CRM, a customer relationship management system, for example, right? You've got to keep data about your prospects, about your clients. You need to keep record of your conversations, your phone calls, your Zoom calls, your Teams calls, emails. Those are all things that should be flowing through or integrating with your CRM, so you have a management system of all the things you're doing with clients. This reduces your risk and liability, allows you to document the basis for recommendations. If there's ever a client complaint, it allows you to document all the conversations back and forth, not just you sending, but anything you're receiving as well. So something like that is really important to have. On the other end of the spectrum, you have certain tools out there that you can input your tasks, and it'll automatically, based on how you prioritize those tasks, create a schedule for you on what you need to do to get things done on time. So there's stuff like that I define as kind of the shiny object syndrome. It's like, don't start with the thing that'll create your schedule. Start with the basic tools and components you need to manage your clients, your book of business, to meet your regulatory requirements. So starting with, if you don't have the basics like a CRM or email archiving tool in place, that's where you need to start.
What's interesting, you said when you were talking about shiny object syndrome, it just made like a light bulb moment for me, because I was thinking about all the people I've talked to over the years, all the business owners, and it doesn't matter what industry really. It's also imitation. Like going to an event and hearing what other people are doing and feeling like you're behind the eight ball, like I better get that too. When you don't know anything about their business other than what they've told you. So they may say, oh my God, this is the best thing since sliced bread. This is the thing that's going to revolutionize the industry. This is the thing that's going to give you your time back. This is what you absolutely need. Well, maybe if your business is just like theirs, that's true. But if your business is different, maybe that's not true. Maybe you'd find that it would be inadequate for you or too robust, and it would create more headaches and heartache than help. It's really, really evaluating your business. What are your current needs? What are your future needs? What are your goals? Where do you plan to be? What do you need today, and can it grow with you tomorrow? So it's doing a full evaluation of your business and not just looking at what everybody else has and assuming, I need that, I need that, I need that. I mean, any of us that have been, whether it's new parents to an infant or it's new parents to a pet, a fur baby. If you went out and bought everything that everybody else had, you could have a house full filled with merchandise and only one or two things that you actually need. So think of that with your business as well. You can buy a lot of expensive seats on a lot of expensive platforms for tools that are more robust than you'll ever need. I know for us as a law firm, most people that open a law firm and get a case management system use about 10% of what the case management system can actually do. Its functionality is far greater, and they're paying for about 10% of the functionality. And the prices get astronomical. So instead of starting on the starter pack, they hear a friend who's had a law firm for a long time say, oh no, I've grown out of that. I'm using X case management system. And they'll spend top dollar for something that has bells and whistles that they aren't going to use for a very long time, when they could have just been using Word and a spreadsheet or a rudimentary case management system to begin with. So I think what you're telling them is so important. Know who you are. Know what your goals are, know what you want, and then do the inventory and figure out what is it that we really need, and how much time would it free up if we had this? Whose plate would it clear off? What could they do if they weren't doing this manual entry or they weren't doing this manual activity? What type of activities could I have them do and could I utilize them for? And what type of value would that add to our bottom line? Because if you're doing it that way, you're going to increase your bandwidth. You're going to increase your effectiveness and your efficiency. You're going to save yourself time and money. And ultimately, you're going to be able to do more things and leverage your people to do more things. So what are a few other things you think that they could start with that are usually kind of the starter pack for people?
Sure. I think there are a lot of great tools out there that help with schedule, right? So a lot of financial advisors, their new clients, depending on your services, right? For some people, they have subscription-based services or monthly-based services where they're meeting with clients regularly. You're doing monthly, quarterly, or annual reviews. So using a calendaring app or tool that allows you to get those scheduled, that you can set up to send automatic reminders, for example. Those are really cool and easy ways to ensure that your clients are getting reminders. They've got it on their schedule. It states whether it's a virtual or in-person meeting, where you're locating, whether it's in person at an office, at a Starbucks, it's on Teams, it's on Zoom. I think those are all things that are great. And you want to make sure that, first and foremost, if you're using Microsoft, for example, Microsoft has in the Office 365 application, a scheduling application. So look at what you already have with the tech you have. You probably have something that meets the standard. If not, find something that integrates well with what you have. In my opinion, something that integrates well is a two-way communication, right? There are tools that only integrate one way and not the other way. So for example, our firm, we have a case management system. We have a separate CRM for prospects. The CRM with prospects talks to the case management system, but the case management system doesn't talk back to the CRM for prospects. So in our circumstance, that's not an issue, but I could see where that may be problematic for certain types of services, for certain types of firms. You also want to look at the capabilities of your tools. There are a lot of tools nowadays that come with artificial intelligence, AI. So our Teams, for example, we're a Microsoft company. Our Teams, we can record our calls and it will transcribe it, and it's an AI feature. In Teams, Zoom has the same thing. You want to understand how those tools work, how are they sharing data, but those are ways in which you're not so concerned taking notes because you're recording the call and you have a transcription. Of course, you always want to review the transcription because it's not always accurate, and that's something you'd have to document your review of the transcript before you were to send it to any client, for example. But those are great ways to make sure any conversation you're having is being recorded. There's a note taker, and you can fully focus on the conversation. I think other tools that firms can look at, if you're doing financial planning, are you using some sort of financial planning software, portfolio management, aggregation tools. Those are all things to look at. But keep in mind, there's a lot of expensive shit out there. So you also want to look at the size of your firm, the resources you have available, and you want to divide what you need from what you want. And then kind of come up with your wish list. I think too, as your firm grows and evolves, what you thought you wanted a year from now based on where you are today, by the time you got there a year from now, you no longer want it the way you wanted it a year ago because the circumstances have changed, right? You've decided to pivot during that time. You've decided to go in a different direction. You decided to implement strategically something different. And so what you thought you would be doing in a year didn't actually come to fruition. You've got to pivot and change. So focus on what your needs are today and maybe what your needs are to grow and sustain your business over the next 3 to 12 months. But don't plan on paying for today something you're going to need in 10 years or 5 years. I know our firm, as it's evolved from me as a solo practitioner to us being a boutique-y sized firm, is that the technology we've used has evolved and changed over time as well, to the point now, based on our services and how we work with clients and the new services we've implemented, we're actually at the point now where we're just developing our own software.
That's an important point to make too. I mean, at some point you might find that the functionality that you need doesn't exist, and so now it's time to invent your own or create your own. And with technology being what it is, it's no longer something that is as expensive as it once was, where you would think about, should we hire a full-time computer programmer on site? Would that be a cheaper option? Not that it's a cheap option, but it definitely gives you what you want. But you have to get to that point, not start at that point. I think a few things that you mentioned that were really important as well, Leila, were the fact that based on the software that you already have or the technology you already have, making sure you understand what speaks with what and what plays nice with others and what simply doesn't. Because I've been in organizations as well where they've tried to patch stuff together or even hire programmers to come in and connect things so that they would work, and they do until they don't. Because we're dealing with technology, and technology advances pretty quickly. And so when one of those systems would upgrade, the other wouldn't, and the patch would no longer work, and then all of a sudden we'd find out that something wasn't functioning and we'd have to call in support. So that isn't always the best practice either, to get a bunch of systems that don't work well together and don't play nice in the sandbox together, and then try to force them to work, because you'll end up with a lot of headache, and money down the road. The other thing is if you're looking at creating a software or even just getting a new software, maybe there's something that, was outside of your reach at one point, maybe price point, or maybe you just weren't there yet, you didn't have the client base you needed, or you didn't have the amount of employees you needed in order to get something that was functioning at a higher rate. And that was more expensive, but now you're finally there. Well, if you're going to move software, that also requires planning, because garbage in, garbage out. If you just think it's as easy as flipping a switch, you're going to have tears. You're going to have frustration. You're going to be very upset because what didn't work in your last system is now being carried over to your new system. So make sure that you understand data mapping if you're changing. Make sure that you're speaking to the engineers for the software you're moving over to understand what you need to clean up on in your current software so that bad data or useless information doesn't get transferred. If there are different customized fields that you once had thinking that you were creating something wonderful for yourself in the current software, the new software may not have that. So making sure you're understanding, do we need to customize something? Do we need to ask them to make something for us so that it'll move over? Or do we need to make a change in our current software so that it can be mapped over and not be a headache when we're trying to figure out where everything is? Those are things that you also want to do before you make any changes, or else you can make a change and have duplicated records or things that are missing or things that you can't find because you realize that the way that they had been established in your previous system no longer work. So make sure it's not just establishing what you need, what type of software, what things would be better for your firm, but also how do we make sure that when we make that change that we're doing it in a way that isn't going to cause us a ton of heartburn once it's done. Because let me tell you, salespeople will tell you just about anything to get you to switch software, about how easy it is, about how convenient it is, how it's going to be, a blink of an eye. But the technology team often tells you something different once you've signed on the dotted line and have moved over. That's why oftentimes it's good to do demos and get your least techie person and your most techie person to look through the demo and tell you how easy it is or how restrictive it is. Oftentimes people that will actually be using the software can ask questions that you might not have even contemplated before if it's been a while since you've had to be hands-on. So sometimes even getting those demos in place to have people be able to utilize them so that you know what questions to ask are important. Are there any things that you can think of, Leila, from the compliance side or even the legal side that would be helpful for them to be thinking about as they're looking at software so that they don't kind of shoot themselves in the foot before they even get their data transferred?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go over some of the complaints our team has about certain technologies, right? So there are a lot of tools out there that, for example, will archive, right? They archive email, they archive social media, they archive text messages, and they do a great job of archiving. But then you get a team like ours who is an outsourced compliance department, and we're tasked with doing the supervision, right? We're tasked with pulling emails and reviewing them. We're tasked with pulling text messages and reviewing them. Well, some of the tools you guys use don't make the supervision piece easy. There aren't adequate reports. There's no way to see or pull certain communications or archived social media or website pages or content at the firm level. It can only be pulled at the client level or the advisor level. And that can make supervision of communications difficult. I know this is a conversation I had recently with a few clients around rollover recommendations and the documentation for those rollover recommendations, whether they're kept in the CRM, right? Customer relationship management system, where all the other client information is. Well, how am I supposed to, at a firm level, know which accounts had a rollover in them, which clients were recommended rollovers to? What if you don't have a way of tracking that through your CRM? Is it a custom field you have to add? Is it a flag that you can put in? Is it a transaction report that we can create? How are we going to be able to track those recommendations so we can ensure there's documentation associated from a compliance and testing perspective? Again, it's not that they don't allow for the archiving and the saving of that documentation. It's the supervision piece that's really difficult. So looking at those tools and looking at it not just from the archiving perspective, but how am I supposed to supervise through this tool? Also, not all compliance technologies have been made equal. There's been a lot of consolidation in our industry, not just in the broker-dealer world, not just in the RA world, but it's happening from a consulting perspective, and it's happening with technology companies. So it's not unfamiliar territory for some of you to have bought a technology and that company gets bought out by another technology company, and then there's supposed to be a conversion of your data into their new systems. I know this was a case with some of our clients who were using the old Schwab compliance data that was bought out by my compliance office, and MCO had a separate tech platform for their current tech. And we had some clients who were using the old tech that was bought out from Schwab that had been receiving some patches, but it was horrible. It was a horrible system to work with. And this client was with the system for a few years after the acquisition and had not yet been transferred to the upgraded platform where this updated tech resided. So the tech was faulty, it wasn't sending out notifications, it didn't work properly half the time. It was really a pain in the ass and created a lot of inefficiencies, errors, and just time sucks. And the whole point of technology is to minimize risk, reduce liability, and make you more efficient, and reduce the time it takes to perform certain tasks. So if the technology is not doing that, then it's not worth keeping.
Yeah, I definitely think about those time sucks. I call them time burglars because I think they're picking my pocket. They're picking my pocket of time. I know you and I spoke to somebody last week, in fact, where we were talking about client complaint logs. And we were talking about where they're storing those and how oftentimes people forget that a lot of your client complaints can even be found through email review. When you're looking at email review, there are a lot of things that you might stumble across, but client complaints were one. And this particular person told us about how, we don't have a log, but we do the complaints right in our software. And, it sounded like it was easy peasy lemon squeezy. Why aren't we all doing this? But some of the things that as we helped them think through it were the fact that, okay, now how do I go if an auditor comes in and says, can you pull all your client complaints? Will I be able to do so? Is it just unique to that person? Is there a way to pull specific complaints that maybe there are a certain segment of our client population that have the same complaints? Are we able to pull those? And we found that although it was a great repository to input content and say X client, had this complaint, blah, 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 it didn't allow all that functionality to be able to filter and pull what we would need if we were audited. So part of it is also thinking beyond just the functionality of the software, but also the needs of the firm. What are some ways we would need to be able to rely on this data? How easy is it to pull the data? How easy is it to find the data? Do you have to have a computer engineering degree to figure this out? Or is it very intuitive? Is it somebody that is just starting at the firm that they would know what to do? Or is it so complex that we need its own manual and training guide just to figure it out? Because oftentimes people are doing what's quick and convenient in the moment, but they're not thinking about their future self having to rely and utilize that data or find that data. Are there things that you would recommend to think through kind of as you're looking at different tech or software to get the best bang for your buck out of it?
I can go kind of with the example you provided. So this client, the email archiving allowed escalations, right? So you can escalate an email and then document with that email any findings. So they were documenting their client complaint process through any complaint that went to email, that came through email through that escalation process. So the question was, okay, so when you pull a report, does it pull all emails that were escalated, whether or not they were client complaints or something different? And that might work right now, where maybe you escalate 5 emails a month, or 5 emails even a quarter. What happens when you're escalating 500 emails or 5,000 emails down the road? And are all of your complaints coming out of email? Could it possibly come out of text messages, social media messaging, verbal through a telephone call? Are you then going into the email archiving system and documenting your complaints there? No. So it's also thinking through what is your testing process, and does the tool you're looking at meet that requirement? There are certainly creative ways in which you can use something like an email archiving tool and some of their settings to meet some of your other needs. But you really have to think bigger picture about your testing process and the documentation that's required, and really identify, is that the best tool for it? The other thing, and you know this, Tracie, from working with tons, thousands of business owners, is there are periods of times where firms grow, they're growing quickly, and they implement a bunch of technology, they get super bloated, and then it's like, fuck, we got so much tech, we gotta slim up, we gotta get some efficiencies, we gotta get better integrations. There's a ton of overlaps between their tools that they have, so they start taking away certain tools. And I think, to your point, it's really important not just to do demos, but to ask for requests where you can get access to the tech platform for like a week, where you can play with it and get your most technologically advanced person and your most technologically challenged person and see if they can both work in it and find issues. I think that you mentioned that earlier, and that's a great point. But you also want to make sure that it's going to be intuitive. You want to make sure that it's actually going to be helpful. And you don't want to get a tech that has a bunch of great features that you're never going to use. So when you have limited resources, when you're small, you want to start with more basic technology. And there's a lot out there. When you're starting off with no AUM, maybe Smarsh is not what you get. Maybe you get a message watcher that's cheaper, right? Maybe when you're starting off, you're not buying into Orion Compliance, which can be expensive. Maybe you're starting off with something a little bit more basic and streamlined, like Smart RIA. Maybe when you're looking at platforms and aggregator tools, you're not immediately going the Black Diamond, you're not immediately going the Orion. All these different tools that are expensive. Maybe you're looking at things you can do internally or other technologies that are more cost effective and maybe are not as robust. So you certainly want to gauge what you need today versus what would be nice to have and move accordingly.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think the other thing is get really curious. A lot of times staff or employees will come to us and say, I really need this, or, this is really hard to do without XYZ. But I think it's important to really get curious. So we've talked about analyzing your needs. We've talked about analyzing the usefulness and other ways in which you may need to use the software to ensure that it can be utilized in all of the different ways that you need it to for your particular organization. But another thing is getting curious with staff and employees when you're looking at changing software. Talk to them about what they like, about what they don't like, about what they wish it could do, about what they wish it wouldn't do, or what makes it more challenging for them when they use it. If they ask for a particular software, why? What is it that we aren't able to do now? And why would that be helpful? How much time would it save? What would you be able to do with that time if you had it back? So that you can do kind of that cost-benefit analysis to determine, does it make sense? Is there enough value there for me to jump right now, or is this something down the road? Is there something else that we have that, again, most people aren't utilizing the capacity that all of their software has? They aren't utilizing all of the functionality. Some of them don't even know the functionality, and it's like a shock when they find out it can do something. Also, figuring out if you already have something that can do that and they just are unaware, or maybe the whole firm is unaware and you aren't utilizing it. Understanding what they're really trying to get to, because it's easy to pull a trigger now when you're in the heat of things, when you're frustrated, and then later find out that you have all of these licenses that you're paying for software that you didn't need, that's being underutilized and costing a pretty penny to maintain. So that's, I think, another area that would be really, really useful for people to just understand what the needs are for staff when they ask for something as well. What are some things that you've heard of maybe from past clients or past people that are wanting to join our firm, maybe potential clients or leads out there where they're really struggling? How does this affect them?
So I think there are a couple things, right? We have kind of the bucket of people who are still working off of spreadsheets, which is bullshit in my opinion. It might be okay as a startup, but we have multi-billion-dollar clients that are coming on board with us, and they're still tracking compliance with with spreadsheets. They're still tracking client relationships with spreadsheets. So you got that bucket of people, which is stop. There's so much technology out there. There is no reason for you to be on spreadsheets. They are error prone. Not everyone knows how to code them properly. There are multiple hands in there. Not a good tool as you get bigger. Then there's the second bucket of people who are only too excited to bring on yet another tool. Well, then that can also become very, very overwhelming, where you have data that you're keeping in multiple technologies. You've got to track what is the data. You've got to train people on how to use those different systems and what they're used for and what's kept there. It can become very, very cumbersome, and again become error prone because it creates confusion as to what goes where, what's used for what. And we see that with larger firms, especially where they allow advisors to have their own DBAs, to bring on their own technology. That creates more and more time and resources from an archiving and supervision perspective. So you kind of want to consider all the pros and cons. You want to think about not just time and cost, but errors. How much of this is prone to error because I'm doing it manually versus technology? And you don't want to bring on tech for the sake of tech. Like, stop comparing yourself to other firms. Well, so-and-so's got this and so-and-so's got that. That's where we started, Tracie. I don't know if you remember. We were like so fed up with our case management system and our CRM and all these other tools. We're like, we're going to go to Salesforce. I've heard so many great things about Salesforce. Salesforce is so awesome. So we have a call with Salesforce. They bring in this other team of quote unquote consultants who are supposed to help us build it out. What a crock of bullshit that was. And a waste of time from a huge, expensive ass company like Salesforce.
Exactly. And if you just buy the name, you would think that, hey, this is going to land the deal and give us everything we absolutely need. But after further review, in that particular instance especially, we were going to have to inherit a consultant basically, because they would have to stay with us for the life of use on that to make sure we were able to get everything we needed out of it for the amount that we were going to pay. It just didn't make a lot of sense once we started really analyzing our needs versus our wants, and then basically what worked well and what didn't. By the time we were done, we were basically customizing everything, and we would have built our own software within their platform. So it didn't really make a lot of sense for us. But had we just bought the name or just bought the euphoria about getting rid of hopefully getting rid of frustration, we would have really set ourselves up for a lot of expense and a lot of failure and a lot of additional frustration. Now, that's a great tool that for some can really set their world on fire and set them in a positive direction. But for our firm, that wouldn't have been the right fit. So again, it's looking at you and not just saying, what's the other guy doing down the street?
Well, I think too, part of it was we knew what we needed. So we were able to ask these questions, and we were able to question the basis of the recommendations from this consulting team, because what we ultimately found out is they had no freaking clue what we actually wanted. They just made a bunch of assumptions and then almost tried to tell us what we needed. And we're like, no. You are being hired by us. You work for us. We tell you what we need, not the other way around. You know nothing about our business. So to your point earlier, Tracie, about salespeople, you got to be comfortable with calling out bullshit. You got to be comfortable with saying, nope, that's not what I need. Don't let them convince you of bringing on something that you could need in 5 years or 3 years that you don't need now, that's a shiny object. Again, get to know your business really well. Get to know your technology really well. Identify what you wish you had. What is the functionality you wish you had? What is your current tech doing well? What is it doing really poorly? And then go do due diligence. These are not necessarily decisions that should be made overnight. I mean, hell, Tracie, you and I were talking about changing our case management system last August. So it's been 8 months ago that we had that conversation, and we didn't make a decision on a new provider until almost January. And even with that provider, we gave them a small project to start to see how it would go before we invested more time and energy in it.
The other thing is that I think we'd be remiss if we didn't point out here is don't assign it to the wrong person in your company. Meaning, kind of like your compliance. When we talk about, putting the CCO hat or the compliance hat on the already over inundated admin that's trying to wear 75 other hats, or the owner who's trying to, do everything to maintain and grow the business and also do compliance. Which do you think ends up being last? Same is true if you put the wrong person in charge of doing the research and figuring things out. And that's also something, over time I've learned, and I think we've learned, is, somebody that is really gung-ho and wants it done sometimes looks at it from their perspective. What are the things I need? And not globally, what are the things that we need as a company? Also, if they don't have the ability to push back and they want to have everybody like them, because there are so many people out there that have a wicked need to be liked, and unfortunately they would sign or have us sign on the dotted line for the most expensive software out there if the salesperson just makes them feel good enough. And so then coming in and pushing back and saying, no, this is unacceptable, what about this, what about that, you find out very quickly that some of that time can be wasted if you have the wrong person in the wrong seat. So it's not only about knowing what you need for your company, but making sure you're establishing the right person to do the research, set up the meetings, and have the conversations as well.
You're absolutely correct. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into technology, whether it's compliance technology for your firm's operations, financial planning, just tracking your leads, your clients. There's a ton of tech out there. One resource I love to point to is you should definitely check out Kitsis. He does a great tech map. I point all of our clients to that tech map because he's done such a great job of listing all the different technologies available to the financial services space. So definitely head over to Kitsis and check out their tech map. But I think this is, we've harped on this so much because it's so important, because technology is something, I feel like it's almost like my cell phone or my laptop. I don't want to have to update or change it in a couple years because I've downloaded all my apps on it. I've got the settings all perfect. I want that shit to last as long as it can. So when you're talking about doing due diligence on technology, it's like, make sure it's going to be something that will be around and will grow with you for a time frame. So super, super important. Of course, if you ever have questions about technology or how to implement it or what are the tools you absolutely need for your business, you can always reach out to us through myralawyer.com.
Definitely. And check us out each time for this podcast. We are always giving you some good nuggets and some good tips and tricks. You can check us out wherever you listen to your podcast. Definitely circle back with us each time we have a new episode. We're trying to give you information that will not only help you with your current compliance program, but any of those new additional things that are happening or coming out as well. And we're always trying to drop nuggets, not just tell you, but give you the ideas that you need and the guidance that you need in order to think it through and establish those things for yourself, because all of you are unique. Your business is unique. You're not a special snowflake that does everything your own way, but there are some things that would require nuance that only you know. So the best advocate for you is always going to be you. Listen to our podcast, get our newsletter, go to www.myralawyer.com and sign up if you haven't already. You'd be in good company with about 50,000 other registered RIAs out there. Remember, good compliance is good business.